Hello, this is Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time center of pestilence, and welcome back to the Darling YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss magic, mysticism, religion, and everything on the fringes of esoterica. And this week, I am back with another interview. I haven't done one of these in a while. It's nice to sort of get back on the horse with them. And this is going to be really different. I normally interview occultists who are very into the practitioner aspect, mostly about, just occult esoteric topics, but I wanted to mix it up a little bit, and I decided to invite an academic on who studies occultism in an academic sense. I am very alien from the world of academia, so I thought it'd be really cool to have that diverse perspective. So here is my lovely guest. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes. First of all, thank you for inviting me over, Georgina. I'm Dr. Angela Puca, and I'm a religious studies scholar, and I specialize in esotericism, the occult, magic. Basically, my core research interest is magic and all the religious traditions that involve some kind of magic and include some kind of magic. But I specialize in non-Abrahamic traditions, and on paganism. And I also have a YouTube channel called Angela's Symposium, where I deliver academic scholarship on the matter. And I'm also a university lecturer, so I also work at the university and I do research and I go to conferences as academics usually do. So that's what I do.
That's really cool. I think it's incredible that occultism is being discussed in academia, because I always, when I think of occultism, we very much get thrown to the fringes and are seen as I don't know, I find that in my personal experience, it's not always taken as seriously as other religions. So that's the first thing I wanted to really ask you about. How does academia treat occultism and these pagan, more fringe traditions compared to normal mainstream religion? Because I can imagine it's a little bit different, but I'm honestly not sure.
So that's a good question. So how academia treats these kind of matters? Luckily, in religious studies, every kind of religious practice or spiritual practice that has some kind of influence, impact for people is deemed to be important, we could say, deserving of being studied. However, it is still quite a fact that there are, the Abrahamic monotheistic religions tend to get more, it's easier perhaps to get research funding for those kind of areas, for those kind of research areas. But I have found that in the years of my PhD, and then after I finished my PhD, and now I'm an early career academic, I can see that there is a growing interest in academia as well when it comes to esotericism. In fact, the last European conference, or rather the conference of the European Association for the Study of Religion, that among academics, we just call it EASR. The panel on esotericism was really well attended, and it seems like every year there are more papers in the realm of esotericism. So from the inside, I see that there is a growing interest in esotericism. And that means that esotericism and the occult are becoming perhaps more impactful on society. So it's not just the case for academia. It's not only interest, it's not only the dominant religious systems that are interesting, because academics realize that even so-called outliers or religions that are not the norm still have an impact on people, and they can have an impact on many different levels for those who practice it, for those that are in contact with the people that practice it. And also they highlight how somebody can endorse a worldview and a belief system that is different from the dominant one. So you can have different layers of understanding that you can gather from studying esotericism or occultist or an occult worldview, because you get all these nuances, and even the understanding of how somebody that was born in a certain religion or in a certain cultural environment then moves away from it and endorses a worldview that is quite different. So that is also something that tells you something informative about how people work and how belief making and meaning making works. So I would say that the study of esotericism and the occult and paganism is extremely important, not only to understand those practices, but also to understand other aspects of human behavior and belief making and meaning making that are present even outside of the occult realm.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because I've noticed from the practitioner and the being in occult sense, there is a rising interest in esotericism in the general populace. A while ago, I looked at Google Trends, which is basically where you can track Google search patterns, and occult, like Google searching, has even gone up. And I've noticed, like, in the community, ever since I got into now, there's a way higher incidence of people practicing. And I've noticed even in bookstores, there's like more occult books. So it's really interesting that academia sort of followed that trend. I'm hoping the trend continues to keep going up and occultism keeps becoming more and more relevant, but I guess time will see. My second question is, do magical practice, you mentioned the funding thing, and that's sort of what got me thinking about this. If a magical practice or mystical practice is from a like mainstream religion, particularly the Abrahamic religions, as you said, those tend to get more funding, versus say Thelema or Hermeticism or Wicca or something smaller, are they treated differently in academia, whether it's a mystical practice from something big or from something small?
Whether they're treated differently, I wouldn't say they are. I don't think that they are treated differently. It's just more the case that they are less studied. And you could make a case that they are less studied because they are less practiced compared to those other religions. But no, I wouldn't say that academics, those who actually research the practice treat differently these kind of practices. Sometimes you can have methodological struggles, meaning that, for instance, something like paganism is very difficult to define, because when you don't have a central dogma, or you don't have a central institution, or you don't have guidelines that every practitioner follows, it is more difficult for an academic to define the practice. For instance, in my case, to define what paganism is or what shamanism is, which was something important for my PhD, for instance. And in that case, you need to develop methodologies that perhaps somebody who is studying a different religion that has a different framework wouldn't necessarily need. So you need to find a way to gather accurate knowledge on a movement that is very fluid and in a way eludes a solid definition. But you still want to gather knowledge on that movement because you know that it is something, it's not nothing. So you need to be quite clever into developing and trying methodologies that will allow you to keep a degree of that kind of fluidity, but still gather accurate knowledge. And so I think that perhaps it presents unique methodological challenges, but I wouldn't say that it is treated differently in academia. It's more about, okay, this is the phenomenon. I don't want to make it into something that it isn't just for the sake of having a clear definition. So how do I understand this phenomenon this religious phenomenon that is quite unique in how it presents? So you have methodological challenges, but I'd say that academics tend to treat with respect every kind of tradition.
That makes me really happy that in academia there's still that level of respect towards all traditions. I've noticed sometimes in the general public that's not always there. You mentioned that it's a little more difficult to define things, which I can imagine it's a nightmare for you guys, considering the community of practitioners can't always define things. Are there any sort of unique challenges that studying like occult and pagan traditions presents compared to more dominant mainstream religions? How does that experience vary?
So I think that one of the main issues is that kind of fluidity that I was talking about. Whereas perhaps in other, well, you could argue that there would be scholars that might argue that even with dominant religions that are more dogmatic and have a central dogma, you still have a mismatch between the institutionalized religion and the so-called dogma and what people actually do. And so you could also argue that perhaps you have that kind of fluidity even in those religious circles, but I would still see that as a bit more uniform, a bit more unitarian. Whereas with something like the practice of the occult and occult practices, esoteric practices, paganism, these tend to be much more individually based rather than institutional based or dogma based. They are very individual, but you can still tell that that is esotericism and is not a glass or
Okay.
something completely different. So if there is still the perception that that is that that you can have a name attached to that phenomenon and people will understand what you're talking about, then you as an academic, as a researcher, need to find a way to understand it better. So I would say that the unique challenge is to find a methodology that allows you to get accurate knowledge, and a methodology that is quite popular among scholars nowadays, especially those who do anthropology, because another thing that I didn't say is that you can study esotericism from different disciplines, from different disciplinary perspectives. So you can have history of religion, and in history of religion, you will have a historical development. So you might have somebody who studies Aleister Crowley's text and what happened to the Golden Dawn based on the documents and the text and the historical evidence. And that would be a work in the realm of history of religion. Then you could have sociology of religion. Sociology of religion tends to study the impact on society. So for instance, you may have statistics on the number of Thelemites or the number of occultists and how many of them, how their beliefs engage and affect how they present and they are in a society. And then you have anthropology of religion, which is what I do. Anthropology of religion studies contemporary practices. So you do field work with people, you do participant observation. So you participate in rituals, you interview people, you try and understand how they define their practices. So when you study, I find, of course, as an anthropologist of religion, for me, the challenge is, okay, so I have 11 pagans to define paganism in 20 different ways. So how do I pin down a definition that is based from the data that I collected during my fieldwork? And a solution to that is a Foucauldian methodology called discourse analysis. So you basically identify patterns of meaning that emerge from the community. And from those patterns of meaning, you are able to identify in the most accurate way you can do. But of course, every knowledge produced by academia is always subject to change, because science is not meant to provide the truth. Science is meant to provide the most accurate knowledge at a given moment, and then it will change over time because things change and methodologies change and everything changes. So thanks to discourse analysis, you are able to identify these patterns of meaning, and then you can give a definition that is not making paganism or thelema or whatever it is that you're studying into something that it is not. But at the same time, you are able to identify what it is in a way that resonates with at least the majority of practitioners. It's not meant to fit every single individual's experience, because as I said, these are very individual practices, but it is meant to identify patterns of meaning that you find across the board, across the community that you study.
Yeah, so I was kind of curious, how did you get into studying occultism? What was that process like? How did you sort of find this path for you?
Yeah, there was quite a journey, because my bachelor's and master's are in philosophy. I've always been interested in magic. As I said, that's kind of my core interest. That's why I also asked you for an interview for my channel about magic in Thelema. So even when I was studying philosophy, for instance, I researched a lot Renaissance philosophy, because there are a lot of magical texts. There's Giordano Bruno, Gian Battista della Porta, Marsilio Ficino, especially, of course, I'm Italian, if you couldn't tell by my accent. So my bachelor's and master's degrees happened in Italy. And in Italy, unfortunately, these kind of subjects are not really studied. This is still an undeveloped field. So when I was still in Italy, I had honestly no idea that you could actually study academically esotericism. Then, thanks to YouTube technology, thank you, I found a video, a conference of a scholar who is now a friend of mine. Pleased to have her as a friend of mine. She's Dr. Jenny Butler from University College Cork, and I found her. She was talking about her PhD research, and it was on contemporary Irish paganism and witchcraft. And for me, it was like, what? You can study these kind of things from an academic point of view. That's what I want to do. And so, but it wasn't possible to do that in Italy. So I tried to do it in England. And yeah, I applied for a PhD program. I got into it. And then I also got a teaching position at the University of Leeds Trinity, which I'm still working at the moment. And so, yeah, that's how I got into it. Like I said, I've always been interested in magic. Even when I was studying philosophy and religious studies in a different way, I was still focusing on magic. For instance, I've studied Buddhism for a long time. I learned Sanskrit and Tibetan, and I was studying Tantric Buddhism and text on magic. So that's always been kind of my core interest. And then when I found out that it was indeed possible to study it from an academic point of view, I was like, okay, I'm all in. I want to do that because it just fascinated me endlessly. So that's why I did it. And yeah, here I am now.
Yeah. Why do you think it's important for academia to look into esotericism? Why should this field be further developed and explored?
Because I think that esotericism has a lot to gives a lot of explanations about, as I said, the belief making and meaning making. So you can see it from the importance of it is multi-layered. Of course, you have that there is a growing interest in esotericism and magic, as you mentioned earlier. And in fact, I was talking about that with Dr. Bernd Christian Otto, a German scholar whom I met last at the European conference that I mentioned earlier. And he and I were having a discussion about magic and how the perception of magic evolved over time. And he was saying, and I was agreeing with him, that we are living in the first time in history where the most prevalent view of magic is positive as opposed to negative. Because that is because of the some cultural developments that you see even in TV shows and movies in the past. Like 50 years ago, the only depictions of magic and witchcraft were negative in every possible way, whereas now thanks to TV shows and movies, but also social media and the emergence of certain aesthetics that you have on Instagram and TikTok and social media in general, you have that magic and witchcraft are now seen not anymore as something that is wholly negative, but a perception of magic that is more enchanting and fascinating is emerging. So perhaps now we live in the first time in history, probably, it's a hypothesis, where magic is perceived more positively rather than negatively. So this, of course, means that there is a growing interest in magic and witchcraft. So one of the reasons why it's important to study esotericism is to understand this religious phenomenon. And all religious phenomena are important to study and understand, because we want to understand all religions and they are all important. So you have the level of understanding these religious phenomena. Then you have the level of understanding the historical developments of in culture, in the wider culture, especially if you have a sociological approach and you look at the impact on society, the cultural developments when it comes to witchcraft. And because sometimes you can also have that a very narrow study can prove important for a completely different kind of study. So for instance, there's a political scientist from the University of Barcelona that I had a conversation with, because she's studying the use of the term witch as in politics. and how that and how that relates to how the community of those who actually practice witchcraft see the term witch, and the depiction and the conceptualization of the term and that concept. So you can have that information and knowledge that you gather in a narrow area and in a narrow research area can still prove important and impactful in a completely different area to understand something that just apparently is very different, but everything is really connected. And that's another point, that cold knowledge is in its entirety important, and just leaving blind spots doesn't really allow us to have the best knowledge and the best body of knowledge that we can get. If you want to get a good body of knowledge as a society and as humankind, you want to include all the aspects of it. And since now witchcraft and esotericism are becoming more impactful for practitioners, of course they become more relevant even for society. And also I think it's important to study esotericism to understand non-dominant worldviews, and that allows us to better understand how human beings work, perhaps. Is not, because then you can have a sort of cross analysis of how come certain people tend to endorse a dominant worldview as opposed to those who endorse non-dominant worldview, and it can give you a better understanding of how human beings develop ideas and worldviews and perceptions of reality. So there are many reasons that as to why it is important to study academically esotericism. I could go on for hours.
What has been one of the most interesting things you've sort of learned or come across in your years of research into the occult?
The most important or interesting thing?
Yeah, either or.
Oh, that's a good question. The first thing that comes to mind now is that when I was doing the fieldwork for my PhD, I was undergoing trainings in shamanism because I was studying shamanism. And what I found particularly interesting is that the community that people created, I found that to be more interesting than the teachings in and of themselves from the teacher, because I was undergoing a series of trainings from the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, because part of my research was on transcultural shamanism. And there were at the time 2 appointed teachers by the Foundation for Shamanic Studies in Italy. And I was undertaking these trainings, and I just found that I think the most interesting thing for me is why people engage with these practices. And you always find that there is such a deep meaning that changes from person to person. And I just find it extremely fascinating, because I have met during my research people that had gone through hell on earth, metaphorically, and they had found themselves thanks to magic practices, shamanic practices, pagan practices. And I think that is the most interesting thing to me, seeing how these practices and the specific belief making and meaning making that people practicing all sorts of magical practices do, how that really affects their lives. And it seemed to me to be a very positive impact for those who clearly keep practice that.
Yeah. So what advice would you have for people who are interested in occult academia, who are considering sort of approaching this, or have just heard about this and are like, wow, that's really cool? What advice do you have for I guess younger you in a sense?
So you mean somebody who wants to become an academic?
Yeah, or approach occultism in this academic sense. What advice would you give?
Oh, okay. So if somebody is a practitioner and they want to understand esotericism from an academic point of view, alongside understanding it from a practitioner's point of view, of course, there are peer-reviewed papers and books on the matter. And that's why I have my YouTube channel, Angela Symposium, because I thought I wanted to bridge the gap between academia and practitioners. And I know that peer-reviewed scholarship is not always accessible to those who don't have a university affiliation or are not university students or university affiliated to university because they're working there. So but although some of them are accessible through libraries, I think, but it depends on the country. So of course, my YouTube channel is hopefully a good resource for academic knowledge on the matter, but otherwise you can use Google Scholar and you can use other database to find peer-reviewed materials. There are some scholars that upload their preprint on academia.edu, so you may find quite a few academic papers there for free, but you have to pay attention because sometimes there are people that are not academics that upload their things. But yeah, that is a good source. Or otherwise, there is JSTOR, which is another website that has a lot of material in the humanities, and yeah, and read books by academics that are published in with academic publishers, because even if you have a PhD, it doesn't mean that everything you publish is academic. So you need to publish with an academic publisher, because that means that it goes for peer review. Because if I, as a PhD, publish a novel, it will still have Angela Puca PhD, but it's not going to be an academic text. So yeah, I'd say, and also there are academics that have Twitter profiles and Instagram, and they share their research. So that could be another interesting way of being updated with what's going on within academic circles. If you want to become an academic, then I would say that it would be a good idea to get, well, your bachelor's and your master's and then a PhD. And depending on the interest that you have, you may want to do it in anthropology of religion, or history of religion, or sociology of religion, or other forms of religious studies that engage with this kind of topic. So it really depends on the interest of the person. I'm not sure if that was exhaustive as an answer.
No, I think it was really helpful. I feel like people watching this will really appreciate that. My sort of final question is, what do you think the future of occult academia is going to look like? Where do you think this is going to go? Because you mentioned that there was a pattern of it getting more popular and more studied. So where do you think that's headed?
Well, maybe this is wishful thinking, but I hope that, as I said, I've seen a positive trend in terms of the growth of interest in esotericism. And there is going to be next month, and I'm going to give a paper there at the conference of the European Association for the Study of Western Esotericism, which is the European Academic Association for the Study of Esotericism. And I'm interested to see how many scholars will be there. And sometimes you don't only have European scholars, but from all over the world. So maybe it's wishful thinking, but I hope that the academic study of esotericism will get more funding, and as a consequence we will be able to get more research, because there are still many aspects of esotericism that are massively understudied. For instance, even contemporary Thelema, I mean, is heavily understudied in academia, and I don't think that it is because there is a lack of interest, but rather because there is a lack of funding. So hopefully over time, the relevance of this field of study will be made plain on many levels within and outside academia, and we will have more funding so that we can conduct research on the topic. So I guess that my hope is that the field will grow and we will get more funding to do this kind of research.
Perfect. So that's pretty much what I wanted to ask you. Where can people find you and see your work and engage with what you have to say?
Yeah, people can find me on my YouTube channel, Angela Symposium, which is, I guess, my main platform, followed by TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. And I'm also on Twitter. So you can kind of find me anywhere if you're interested.
Okay, thank you so much for coming on. If you are watching this video, like, comment, subscribe. And if you're subscribed for 93 days, you'll meet your holy guardian angel and you will never have to know what academia is. I promise it works like that. Do not report me to the Better Business Bureau. it will go bad. Do not do it. But I'm Georgina Rose. I'm Darling. I am on many places. I'm here on YouTube. I do a podcast. I'm on Twitter, TikTok, and all the places that you could find me. Also Instagram and Telegram. I forget about those two a lot. And if you want to support me to continue to allow me to do this and enable me to keep making content, check out my Patreon. You get extra videos every month, early access, virtual guides, amongst other things. So thank you for watching. Have a lovely day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one. All right.